This on my wrist right now is the Omega Seamaster 300 meters, and this is the Omega Seamaster Aquaterra. Let's put them head to head and see who wins. Believe it or not, I actually own, you guys might not have known this, but I actually own an Omega Seamaster 300 meters. I think it's one of the best watches in the world, and I talk about it far too much. But when I was buying my Omega, there was a watch that gave it some pretty good competition, and it's the Omega Aquaterra. But why did I choose the Omega Seamaster over the Aquaterra? Let's put them head to head and find out. Welcome back to Time on the Wrist at Chisholm Hunter. My name is Harrison, as always, and today is another versus video, the Aquaterra and the Seamaster. But before we start, this is a new mic. It took us ages to set up. I'm really excited about it. The audio should be crispy clear. For the purpose of this video, I am going to take my Omega off. I have the Omega on the NATO strap, but remember this also comes in a bracelet. I have the Aquaterra in the bracelet, but remember it also comes on a rubber, so you can kind of mix and match with your straps. Let's begin with the case diameter. So on the Omega Seamaster 300 meters, in my left hand, it comes in at 42 millimeters in diameter, whereas the Omega Aquaterra comes in at 41 millimeters in diameter. I do prefer slightly smaller watches. I have slim wrists, 6.5 inches, so the Omega Aquaterra is probably a better fit here. With that said, because it doesn't have a bezel, it actually looks a little bit bigger. Its presence, its dial real estate is that much more because of the lack of bezel. So when you actually end up putting it on the wrist, I would say that the Omega Seamaster looks smaller than the Aquaterra, even though it's not. There's just so many variants to consider when you're talking about the case diameter. Next up, we have our digital calipers. No, we don't, we have the thickness. We have the thickness of the watch, not our digital calipers, but we're using digital calipers. So the thickness of this Omega Seamaster 300 meters comes in at, according to our digital calipers, 13.5 millimeters. With that said, online it says it's 13.7, so I'm going to settle somewhere in between. Also remember that I have the NATO strap on this, so actually it wears that little bit thicker on my wrist. This is a thick watch, but it is a diving watch. So let's look at the Aquaterra. The Omega Aquaterra comes in at 13.5 millimeters, so a millimeter thinner than the Omega Seamaster 300 meters, and actually I do prefer slimmer watches. I prefer watches that sit that little bit closer to the wrist, and the reason for this is because you're less likely to ding them, you're less likely to dent them, and they sit just a little bit more comfortable. I have slimmer wrists, it's just my preference. The Omega Aquaterra's lugs come in at, according to our digital calipers, 47.5 millimeters. Now, this is an interesting one because I've got a sneaky suspicion, I've got a hunch that the Omega Seamasters will be a lot more than that. The lug-to-lug on the Omega Seamaster comes in at 50 millimeters, so my sneaky suspicion was correct. And I think this bigger feel is partly because of the lugs on the Omega Seamaster. They're a lot more elongated and elegant, whereas the Aquaterra, to my left, is that little bit more compact. And to be honest, I prefer the more elongated lugs on the Omega Seamaster. I feel like it kind of wraps around your wrist a little bit more, and it just gives it a better feel overall. Moving straight onto the weight of the Aquaterra first, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna get the weight of both of them on the bracelet because my current Omega is actually on the NATO, but let's just compare the weight on the bracelet so we actually get a comparison. So the Omega Aquaterra comes in at 151 grams. And the Seamaster that is on my wrist comes in at, give or take, 167 grams. So it is that little bit heavier, but then we get to the water resistance. And the water resistance of the Aquaterra is 150 meters, whereas the water resistance of the Seamaster is 300. So obviously there's gonna be some give and take there because of the increased water resistance. I suppose on this one it is personal preference. And if you are a diver and you're going to actively dive to 300 meters daily, then yes, go for the Seamaster. But I can tell you from my experience that I've never dived, ever. And I own the Seamaster 300 meters. I would actually consider myself a bit of a desk diver. Before we go any further, we have a tradition around here at Chisholm Hunter, and it of course is called the wrist check. What is on your wrist at the moment? Let me know in the comments. Let's have a conversation. Of course, on my wrist is, as always, the Omega Seamaster 300 meter diver on the NATO strap. It is unbelievable. We've covered the specs, so let's get into the case and the bracelet. Remember that we were comparing the bracelets, not the NATO that's on the Omega at the moment. So let's begin with the case on the Aquaterra. The Aquaterra has a combination of polished and brushed finishing. And I love the way that they do this on both models, I have to say. The way that they do the polished side of the steel down the lugs almost makes it look like it's curving round your wrist. And that's partly why I like the Omega Seamaster so much, is because the lugs are that little bit more accentuated, they're a little bit longer, and it looks more like it's wrapping around your wrist. Moving straight onto the bracelet of this watch, it has polished links down the center just here and 2 brushed links at either side. I love the bracelet on this. It is that little bit more dressy with that little bit more polished steel on it. Polished is obviously a little easier to scratch than brushed, but I love it. It is a dressy kind of watch and it gives dressy vibes, if you will. I actually prefer the bracelet on this to my Seamaster 300 meters. The Seamaster 300 meters kind of has a 4-link feel with 4 sort of thin lines of polished running down it. I'm not as big a fan on that. It just doesn't do it for me, but this is nice. Moving into the face, or around the face. No, we're not moving into the face, or around the face. We're covering the crown before we do that. So on the Omega Aquaterra, the crown is quite short and quite stubby, but it kind of tapers out. So it starts quite thin, or a bit thinner, and then it tapers out. And it's quite easy to turn, it's quite prominent. I actually prefer the crown and think it's easier to turn on the Aquaterra than the Seamaster. But then the big difference arises where you have a screw down crown on both, but the Seamaster 300 meters has crown guards, whereas the Aquaterra doesn't. I suppose it's what you want to go for here. If you want a dressier kind of styled watch, then the Aquaterra is probably the one. But if you want a more bulky, chunky, sporty feel, then the Omega Seamaster is the one. I'm not gonna lie, in my collection at the moment, I have a lot of sports watches, so I would like to go into the more dressy watch feel. I also work a lot in an office, so the dressy kind of watches make sense to me. So I would side with the Aquaterra at the moment. Moving straight onto the face of these models, but before we do, we have an announcement. Our Breguet hat competition has now closed. We've revealed the winners on, well, firstly we've commented back to those that won, but we've also revealed it on the community tab, so head there to see if you won the Breguet hats. We gave away 5, and we have another exciting giveaway coming in the next video. Both of these models actually have sapphire crystal glass, and this sapphire crystal glass has anti-reflective coating on the back and the front. Now, I know that some people don't like sapphire crystal glass having that anti-reflective coating on the front because of the scratch resistance of the AR coating. But I've had this Omega Seamaster for a good 2 years, and I've really put it through its paces. I've taken it up hills, I've hit it off of multiple things, and it's never scratched. So if you're gonna chuck it against a wall, then it might, but if you're not, you should be fine. Moving on to the face of both of these models, but before we get onto the face, let's look at the bezels. The bezel on the Omega Seamaster 300 meters is obviously black ceramic and has white numerals in it. Being a fully functional diver, it does have that dot of lume at the 12 o'clock mark. And I like ceramic bezels. They're more durable than steel, but I also like the feel that steel bezels give you, and this Aquaterra has a very limited steel bezel. But it is polished, and polished scratches that little bit easier. And this is where the thing comes in. If it's a dress watch, you'll be fine. You'll take care of this, but if it's an outdoorsy, bulkier kind of watch that you're after, I would lean towards the Seamaster. You're just less likely to get it damaged. Moving on to the face of both of these models, and actually moving on to the face. Now, I know I keep getting distracted by the Numaikan watches, and predominantly just watches actually, but let's move on to the face. It's an interesting one. I lean more towards one side, but that's because I am biased. I did buy the Seamaster. The Seamaster has the iconic wave motif running through it. It is beautiful, it adds so much depth, but to be fair, the Aquaterra has a hexagonal teak pattern running through it, and it actually represents the decking of ships in the olden days when they had the wooden decking, which I love. I love that backstory behind it. And it's actually a little bit more symmetrical, believe it or not. So I quite like both of them. I'd struggle to decide here. Moving deeper into the face of both of these models, both of the models come in white, but what I would say is it's not a pure white. It's almost like a metallic-y white, and it reflects the light really, really nicely. Both of these models' dials are beautiful, I have to say. When we get onto the hands and the indices, the hands on the Omega Seamaster 300 meter diver are actually skeletonized, whereas the Aquaterra aren't skeletonized. They're sort of more slim and elegant. They have that more dressy feel. And then you get to the second hand on the Aquaterra, which is actually orange, whereas the second hand on the Seamaster is of course black, but then you have that red splash at the end of the second hand. This is a difficult one because I naturally am more drawn to the skeletonized hands, but I know a lot of people really don't like the skeletonized hands. And I also don't really have a dressy watch at the moment apart from my Grand Seiko, maybe? So I'd probably sway towards the Aquaterra. I actually also prefer the use of colour on the Aquaterra than the Seamaster. I mean, you've got the Seamaster logo, which is in red, and the tip of the second hand, whereas you've got the full second hand on the Aquaterra. You've also got the Seamaster logo, and also you've got the 60-minute counter, the 15-second, 30, and 45, all with a splash of orange, which pops out really nice against that dial. It's not that I don't like the Omega Seamaster. I bought one, I love it, but I just think they could have maybe accentuated the red a little bit, add a little bit more vibrance and a little bit more color. With that said, I do probably prefer the skeletonized hands on the Omega Seamaster. So from that point, the Seamaster wins. But anyway, let's get on to the indices now. So the indices on the Seamaster 300 meters are a lot bigger than the Aquaterra. They're a combination of circles and rectangles, and they're of course filled with Super Luminova. Now, we'll take a look at the Super Luminova a little bit later. There's one clear winner in my eyes, you can probably guess, but the Aquaterra gives it a good run for its money, especially for a more dressy watch. On the Aquaterra, they are kind of like very thin triangles, but also filled with Super Luminova. They look very symmetrical, but they just are a little bit too pointy for me. I don't know what it is. They kind of all point towards the middle of the dial, and I'm just not as big a fan. I think that I'd stick, I can't really tell what it is, but I'd stick with the Omega Seamaster. The date window for both of these models, to my satisfaction, is at the 6 o'clock mark. But there is pretty big differences to both date windows when you really look into the detail. Maybe not from surface level, but when you're a watch nerd like you and I, and you dig into the detail, there is differences. And the first difference that I noticed is that the Omega Seamaster 300 meters date window is squared, it's like a rectangle, but the Aquaterra's is strange. Not in a bad way, in a good way. It's kind of a curved rectangle. It's the only way I can describe that. I don't actually know what shape this is. If you know, let me know in the comments, but it is like a curved rectangle. I'm actually quite a big fan of this. But what I'm not as big a fan of is the fact that on the Omega Aquaterra, the 6 o'clock date window has actually replaced the 6 o'clock marker. Whereas on the Omega Seamaster, the 6 o'clock date window's only partially replaced the 6 o'clock date window, or date, you guys know what I mean. And when you look at this in the dark, which we'll get onto in a second, this doesn't have the 6 o'clock mark, whereas this partially does. Let's move straight onto the Lume, but before we get onto the Lume, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button and that bell icon to be alerted of new videos. It really helps more than you know, and we are on our way to 10,000 of you. That is incredible. Here is the Lume for the Aquaterra. It's actually very bright in this room, so you might not be able to see it as well, but it is quite bright. And here is the Omega Seamaster. Again, it is quite bright in this room, but it does shine beautifully in the dark. Plus, it has a combination of green and blue lume. Moving quickly onto the movement, which is the crux of most watch purchases to us watch lovers out there, us watch snobs. I'm a bit of a watch snob. I embrace the watch snobbery. Let's get into the specs of these movements. The Omega Aquaterra has the caliber 8900, which is an in-house movement from Omega. It is self-winding with a coaxial escapement, certified by Master Chronometer, approved by METAS, and resistant to magnetic fields reaching 15,000 Gauss. It has a free sprung balance with silicone balance spring, 2 barrels mounted in series, and automatic winding in both directions. And it has a power reserve of 60 hours. The Omega Seamaster, my Omega Seamaster, has the Omega caliber 8800 movement, which is of course self-winding with a coaxial escapement. It's certified by Master Chronometer, approved by METAS, and resistant to magnetic fields reaching 15,000 Gauss. It of course has a free sprung balance with silicone balance spring, and it's automatic winding in both directions. It has a power reserve of 55 hours. So, technically speaking, the Amiga Aquaterra actually wins the movement battle. But who wins the war overall? I wouldn't like to see this as a war, you know. I'd like to see it as more of a brotherhood. I think that both of these watches are extremely different. Both of these watches have different personalities. Both of these watches should and could be used for different things. The Amiga Seamaster that is on my wrist at the moment is more bulky, is more durable, whereas the Amiga Aquaterra is more dressy and more elegant. The thing is, people's preferences change over time. When I got into the watch industry, I wanted sports watches. That's what I wanted. I got Tudor Black Bay, then I got an Amiga Seamaster, and so on and so forth. I don't really have a dress watch yet, or I have one Grand Seiko, but you know, I'm a watch nerd, I collect watches. So actually at the moment, I would prefer to get the Aquaterra, even though I feel like I'm really stabbing the Amiga Seamaster in the back that's on my wrist. At the moment, my personal preference is just leaning towards the Aquaterra. The Amiga Seamaster 300 meter diver that is on my wrist, according to the Chisholm Hunter website, comes in at £4,840, whereas the Amiga Aquaterra comes in at £5,130. That's quite a big difference. At the end of these videos, I do normally give which watch that I would pick, and today I'm picking the Aquaterra. And that might be a shock to a lot of you because I know a lot of you watch the channel and you know that I love my Amiga Seamaster, and I do love my Amiga Seamaster, but the thing is, this is where I'm at in my watch journey. I have 3 sports watches sitting at home. I'm very, very lucky to have 3 sports watches sitting at home, and I just would like something that little bit more dressy. That's something a little bit different, and I do tend to gravitate towards the underdog. So I would go for the Aquaterra here. Please subscribe to this channel if you enjoyed the video and would like to join the Chisholm Hunter watch community. I did realize I said join twice there, but it made sense. If you want to join the watch community, this fantastic, the best probably on YouTube, in my opinion. This is somewhere here is the subscribe button, somewhere in this area. Then you can like this video as well. That I would really appreciate that. We also have our very own Chisholm Hunter Watches page, which is called Chisholm Hunter Watches, surprisingly. And we post tons of watch content there. We actually posted a studio shot the other day of us building the studio and taking it down and all that kind of stuff. It's quite cool. So it gives you like a little behind the scenes snippet. I am totally rambling. I'll see you next time.